What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hartness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Jodie Rogers, and we speak about mental fitness, how to deal with it with groups and in ourselves. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, lean back and enjoy. Hello, Jodie. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you. Very happy to be here.
Yes, and I'm very curious to learn more about mental fitness from you and your experience. And before we're getting there, I always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
Don't actually. I don't. What do I call myself? I don't call myself anything other than the kind of MD and founder of Symbia, the company, which is a leadership and professional development business. And I suppose I probably don't because I'm a number of things. You know, yes, I facilitate. I'm also a qualitative moderator. I'm also a quantitative researcher. I also have a degree in psychology and interpersonal communications, and I'm a content creator. So I do so many different things. I think if I just said I was a facilitator, it would narrow things down. And I'm not sure that everybody knows what a facilitator is either. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how helpful that would be without a further explanation, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting. I have the impression that over the past year, the concept of facilitation really spread around the world when people realize that it actually makes sense to have someone to take care of group conversations.
Yeah, tell me about it. The lack of skill, it's most notably visible just in meetings. I think it's a real shame that people think that you can just turn up to things and talk and expect stuff to happen. I think facilitation historically, where I first came across facilitation was when I was working client side, and we would have facilitators come in and run creative workshops for innovation ideas, new product design, concept writing, etc. Outside of that, I don't think I would have really come across it before. But I think moderation and facilitation are similar but quite different. But both are really have become essential in the last year. I'm not convinced that I think we understand the importance. I'm not convinced that everybody else has cracked it yet and has had that light bulb moment.
Yeah, and still I think once you have experienced how a well-facilitated meeting feels, then you cannot unsee it anymore.
Yeah, well, I think part of our job is actually to bring the language into normal society so that we label it and help people understand, you know, not just experience it, but know what it is so that they can ask for it again and understand its value. I think if we do more of that, then that will kind of spread the good word, I suppose.
Yeah, which I will use this reflection just as a bridge to jump right on the topic.
Yeah.
The word of mental fitness. I think that's one of those that needs more spreading across society to be aware of what it is and how we can actually nurture it. So maybe for the audience, you can quickly explain what mental fitness actually is and how it differs from mental health.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, because I think there's an assumption. Certainly when I use the term mental fitness, everybody nods and agrees. And there's an assumption that we understand what it is. And I mean, some of that assumption is fair, but it's really important to be clear about the distinction between mental health and mental fitness. Not because it's very confusing, but because of what that terminology and the baggage that terminology brings. So if we think about mental health in general. We know it's a very underserved topic area, very underfunded, etc. And largely when you talk about mental health, where people go is mental ill health. They think about stress, depression, anxiety, burnout, etc. And, and that's so important. And, it's always been important, ever more so in, the moment that we're living in. However, it's only one part of the story, right? And I like to talk about the, more of the physical world, let's say physical health. For centuries, we focused on the eradication of disease and illness. And it was only in the 1970s, when they finally made the direct causal link between smoking and lung cancer. By the way, they knew, they just hadn't got the evidence yet. When they made that realization, it actually was quite disruptive in the health industry, because there was a realization that, hold on a minute, if we actually spend some time educating people about maladaptive behaviors like smoking and, eating too much sugar and junk food and fried food, etc., teach them about nutrition, teach them about physical exercise, vitamins, etc., we can take millions of people out of the system, save millions of dollars, pounds, euros, and improve the lives of millions of people, because it's a preventative approach, not a cure approach. And I think that's really fascinating. And of course, upsprang the whole fitness industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, gyms and exercise and all of the rest. And that's not my intent to spring up a new industry, but the concept behind it, really, or the philosophy behind it, this idea of don't just focus on illness, but actually focus on prevention as well, is really important. And so when I think about mental health and even mental wellness, even when we think about wellness, the work that's done there, it's fantastic, but it's largely about keeping people out of the illness space. And so if we can focus on taking people from -5 to -3 and, let's try and get people to 0 or even 1. Is that really enough? What about if we're okay and we're fine? Like, most of us feel like we're okay, but the absence of illness does not equal health.
Yeah.
So I want to really inspire people to, well, first of all, educate yourself. We know a lot about our mind and emotions, in the academic world, but not in the ordinary world. So first of all, I want to raise that awareness. And then secondly, let's actually strengthen, enhance and empower ourselves around this idea of mental fitness. How do we get from a 0 to a 3? How do we get from a +3 to a +6? So that when the inevitable setbacks and challenges happen in life, we have some resources to pull on, that we actually have taught ourselves how to respond and how to deal with emotions and thinking traps, etc. So that's a little bit of the crusade that I'm on right now, which is, it's not enough just to focus on the illness side of the spectrum. How do we optimize? How do we leverage? And how do we get better overall as a community, as a society, as individuals, etc.
So would that mean that then mental fitness means the ability to cope with drawbacks in a positive way? So it's a growth mindset?
It's many things, one of which can be a growth mindset. But think about it like this. If you truly have some self-awareness, if you understand what your triggers are in life, what your typical thinking traps are, if you acknowledge that just because you think a thought, it doesn't make it a fact, that you actually control your thinking, that your thinking does not control you, that just because you have an emotion does not mean that that emotion is directly related to the thing that you think it is, and it is proportional reaction to what has just happened. Because sometimes you're tired, you're hungry, you're actually frustrated about something else, but you're having a fight with the person that's in front of you. Now, if you understand yourself, self-awareness, and you have the tools and ability to regulate, just like a golfer will adjust for the wind, right? Mm-hmm. You're in a situation, you're about to get angry. Let's say you get an email, right? We all get emails that piss us off. It's like, okay, I'm going to reply. And there's steam coming off your keyboard. Then you're thinking, I'm emotionally charged. For me, that's a red flag. This second, I am emotionally charged. I know, get out of the situation, step away, step back. Whatever you do now, your amygdala is in control, and that is always regrettable. And there's different ways that everybody has different tools. A lot of people have no tools. They don't even have the self-awareness to realize this is a red flag and I shouldn't be responding. So the idea first is self-awareness, then self-regulation. So if you want a bucket for it, it's emotional and social intelligence. And then your levers can be growth mindset, it can be optimism, it can be, the meaning you overlay onto the events on your life, etc.
Thank you for explaining that. And I also think that self-awareness is one thing. So realizing that physically we get into the stage of stress, and usually we feel it on our palms, and that we need to shake energy off. But I think it's also the awareness of how our brain functions. Because you mentioned the amygdala when we get an email that makes us angry, and our brain just thinks it's a tiger. So it's a threat to life. Our brains doesn't have evolved, actually.
Yeah.
So we are still reacting in the same way as our pre-ancestors would have.
Well, this is, for me, so yeah, absolutely. Everything that we teach in mental fitness is a combination really of neuropsychology, just really understanding ourselves, a bit of physiology as well, understanding our patterns, where we've come from, our values. Just it actually pulls on a number of different schools of thought. And the reason for that is because I love evidence. I love research. I love data, and I love science. And the whole, let's just say there is a movement of positivism. I'm not going to say positive psychology because there's a lot of evidence behind that, but the mantras, and if I believe I will receive, affirmations, etc., etc. And for me, that was never enough. You cannot tell me to think positively and I'm just going to change the way I've been thinking for the last 20 years. But if you tell me neurologically and psychologically what is going to happen in my mind that will make a difference to my behaviors, then you've got me. Now, in many ways, I've created mental fitness and the book and the course and all the things to speak to me because of how I need to be convinced. But I hope that it also then, I always like to speak to my most cynical audiences. So for the people who don't believe, there's so much evidence, there's so much science, there's so... Yeah. So that's, you're absolutely right. The psychology, the neuropsychology behind it, I just find fascinating. And I think that we should have been taught this when we were in primary school. And I'm deeply frustrated that we weren't. I have a 1,000-page manual for my washing machine. What do you have for your brain? Yeah. And we know, it's not like it's true that we know least about the brain, but we know stuff. It's not a complete anomaly. We know stuff, and there's a lot of theories, and there's a lot of, quite frankly, just ways of thinking about our thinking that are already helpful, regardless of whether they're, empirically proven or not.
And when you work with groups, you teach them about mental fitness. So how do you create this awareness and this self-care for them?
So what I'll say first of all is we work with leadership teams and wider teams across lots of different things, actually. And mental fitness as a topic, we largely had the Trojan horse in for the first kind of 5 years, until it was probably about 2 years ago. especially when we started to use the term mental fitness, that was a bit more interesting for people because, and actually I'll say what I didn't say at the start, which was why the distinction between mental health and mental fitness, because of all of the taboo that surrounds mental health. Yeah. So if we start to talk about mental fitness and the benefits of it, not the costs of the absence of it, but the benefits of having it. And that just opens up a different conversation that people, it's much more accessible for people and it doesn't have the same stigma. So we had a Trojan horse it into in the beginning because, of course, people weren't coming to us for mental fitness, partly because there's this assumption that, well, there's nothing wrong. So why would I don't need this and there's nothing wrong. And if I do this, then people are going to think I think there's something wrong and all of that meta thinking. In the last year, with the last year and a half, with the opportunity, let's say, of the pandemic, we just bust the door in and went, right.
Everyone realized it was in our face how important it is.
It's in our time. So I didn't answer your question. What I'll say is the self-awareness aspect of it. How do we raise it for people? And it's kind of linked to what I've just said, which is it's really important to not, I feel it's really important to not go to this heavy place of you can burn out and you're stressed, etc. Does that come up? Absolutely, it comes up. But actually, because we want to make this accessible, we also make it fun. So we start with using perceptual illusions to help people understand that you can all be looking at one thing and see completely different things. How is that possible? Then we introduce them to the mind and the brain and how the brain works, etc. And so that's our kind of game. And actually, the reason why we use perception first as the beginning is fun. It's interesting for people, but we explain that this is our gateway between our internal world and our external world. And then that's when we start to go on an inner journey, really, about helping people understand their, Unilever uses the term, it's also used in sports world, the inner game, which is really interesting and which we completely buy into. It's the same thing. It's acknowledging that you have resources inside of you that can be leveraged.
Yeah. And I think to start with this visual illusion is a nice way to prime the group, actually. Also, okay, you see something, what do you see? And then if you look at, I think the same is true for abstract art. If we look at abstract art, every one of us sees something different. Mm-hmm. And only by speaking it out, pronouncing it, we realize, oh, we're not talking about the same thing. And I think having this awareness, self-awareness and group awareness, then also opens the door to speak about concepts in a different way, because you realize, okay, when I see something, explain something, a reality that I perceive, it might be different for someone else.
That's exactly it. So we go on to talk about cognitive illusions then, because there's illusions everywhere. And the trick is being able to see the illusion. And, when we talk about perception, we talk about, we don't see like a camera. Our brain doesn't see like a camera. We actually see what is helpful to see. So neurologically, we are making cognitive leaps of faith and we're adding in meaning where it may not exist. And we're removing details where it's unhelpful, which is where the whole cognitive dissonance topic comes up. I think helping people recognize it. Let's imagine there is a camera, but there's a lens on it. What we want is for you to know there's a lens there, and we want you to be able to take that lens off and look at it and go, this is skewing how I'm interpreting this event, and that's not really helpful. So maybe I'll put a different lens on. Maybe I'll just take the lens off, but it's empowering people with that understanding that makes a difference.
And I can also imagine that it introduces a language then to the group of just asking the question, which lens are you putting on right now?
Yeah, exactly.
And one video just came to my mind. I think it was a psychological experiment where they showed people a video of a group throwing a ball back and forth. And at some point, there's a bear walking through the screen. And they asked the participants, okay, count how many times they're switching the ball. And then they ask them, so did you see the bear? And nobody saw it.
Yeah, we use that in our workshops. We started using a different one because that became so popular, everybody knew it. But, I won't share the one that we use now. But what's interesting about that is helping people understand attention and how we attend to information, and the acknowledgement that there's, we're bombarded with 400 million bits of data in any given moment. We can't consciously attend to all of that at most. And the numbers are debatable. No one completely agrees, but at most it's more or less 40 bits of data. So we've got 400 million bits of data versus 40 that you consciously attend to. So then the question becomes, who decides which 40 gets into our conscious attention? And we actually decide, but we don't realize that we decide. But when we realize we decide, then we have the power over our attention. And so in that example, what's happened is you've influenced their attention by giving them a very specific goal. And what's very powerful about that is, so the counting is a specific goal. What's powerful about that, and a lot of people don't realize, is when you're really focusing, actually what happens then by default is you delete everything else. And so a good example of this is, if you've ever thought about buying a car, let's say it's a blue Ford Focus. Suddenly they're everywhere. They're on the motorway, you've parked at the supermarket, it's right beside you, you're on the metro, there's an advert. It must be a sign, right? No, it's your reticular activating system, which is designed to pay attention to whatever you tell it is important.
Exactly. And then talking about a car is maybe even important, because then you see the car you want to buy in different contexts. When it comes to ideas or conversations, when we suddenly only focus on seeing our own beliefs confirmed, then it becomes tricky the moment where we are not aware of that.
Well, yeah, then this is the classic confirmation bias, and also known as the echo chamber in social media. And what I find interesting is, why does that happen? And again, it goes back to what you hinted at the beginning, which is, well, first of all, our brain doesn't like cognitive dissonance. So if we have things that don't match in our brain, it's deeply uncomfortable for us. And of course, we want to be right. We want to be surrounded by people that think and act like we do. But then this brings up the whole diversity and inclusion challenge. And what we find is, I grew up in a village of 1,000 people, and I can tell you now that the best thing that ever happened to me was traveling the world, because that's what opened my mind to realize there's different ways of seeing, thinking, feeling, and believing. And if you stay in your bubble of confirmation bias, which many of us do, and I do about certain topics, and I'm open-minded about other topics, but I think we simplify life and we drain the color out of it a little bit. But again, helping people, if you have a fight with someone, you just think that way because of this, you need to think this way, and it's just two worldviews butting heads. But if you get in the helicopter and go above that and explain the neurology of what's happening behind it and why it's happening, and open up the possibilities, then you can have a different effect. Which is why I think there was a Heineken advert, and there's a couple of adverts that played on this idea of biases and stereotypes how they change people's minds. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think these adverts, they're really contributing, because it's so in your face suddenly that you realize it. The advertisement, I think it's Dove or Always, a female brand, and they ask girls to run like a girl and fight like a girl and win like a girl, something like that. And they ask boys and girls of different age to perform that in front of a camera. And while the young girls, when they are asked to run and fight like a girl, you see all this energy and all this power. And as soon as they hit puberty, they change, and they are only doing this kind of stereotype. So if you see that, then suddenly you realize the stereotypes that you're exposed to and how you adopt them.
Yeah. I think it's really about removing the veil and helping people see the unseen, but also then giving them tools to see differently, to think differently, to feel differently, and to act differently.
Greetings, listeners. Dancing with Markers has launched a new online self-paced course on visuals designed with facilitators in mind. Stop making boring, meaningless slide decks and start bringing visuals into your meetings in a fun, purposeful, and creative way that will have a real impact on improving the outcomes of your meeting. Visuals are central to facilitating engaging meetings, but so many facilitators and trainers lack a strong design muscle to create fun and purposeful flip charts, slides, and visual templates. For the facilitator who wants to incorporate better visuals into your meetings, this course is designed to transform you into a confident visual facilitator. Find the link to purchase in the show notes with a special 10% off coupon just for Workshops Work listeners. Now, back to the show.
Do you have a favorite tool that someone could apply?
It would take them. The shortest tool is probably about 15-20 minutes, to be honest. The silent scream, maybe, I think is really powerful. Which, do you want me to explain it?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the silent scream, it ties into what we've been actually talking about, which is our brain and how it reacts to uncertainty, stress, fear, etc. So the amygdala fires up and it goes into fight or flight or freeze mode. And so what typically happens, of course, we don't have the saber-toothed tiger triggering us. It's a text message from our boss saying, where are you? And we panic. I'm supposed to be somewhere and I missed a meeting last week. Oh no, I'm going to get fired. And what happens? Cortisol increases in our body. Adrenaline goes through our body. And so we are really raptured by that in the moment. Prefrontal cortex, where rationale, reason, and logic resides, goes offline, which is why we regret some of the things we do when we're emotional, because our rational mind isn't really in the picture. But so the fastest way to deal with this is, well, you could have a fight, but we don't recommend it. It's not good for your career. You could run around the office or run outside the office. That would actually also work. But most times we're not in the situation where we can do that. And instead, we recommend that you do the silent scream. So you go to a private location, could be a bathroom stall or a room. I do this with my kids and I get my kids to do it. And I also do it when my kids drive me crazy. But anyway, what you do is you bend your knees like haka style, or like you're going to catch a rugby ball, and you bend your arms and your legs. You take a big, deep breath, and then you tense every muscle in your body and you let that breath out slowly in a silent scream. The reason why it's silent is so that you don't call the police, primarily. not you, that your neighbors don't call the police. And then it sounds a bit like this. And you do it until you expel all of the air from your body. But what you're really doing is you're fighting physiology with physiology, and you're telling your body that you are in fight mode. And so it can use the adrenaline, it can it tense all of the muscles and do all of the things. And then you can dissipate the adrenaline, which is when you begin to get control back over that shaky voice and your shaky hands, and the color comes back to your face, and you can regulate your breathing and regulate your heart rate.
Thank you for sharing that. How do you recognize whether a group is mentally, because I can imagine that if you have this tension, if you have stress, if you have a lack of self-awareness in a group, that totally impacts the dynamic. It's whether you have a curious conversation, can be a debate, or whether you're getting personal and emotional.
Yeah.
So how do you recognize that early enough, and what can you do about it?
So, two things. I don't wait to recognize it. I just assume it because it's true. There's always going to be people in there that are in their heads, and other people that are stressed and haven't slept well and emotional. And, that's usually an underlying cause of then some symptoms that you see, which might be communication challenges, dysfunction within a team, fighting within a team, etc. And so every session we run starts with a mental fitness session. That's just the way it is. Even if it's, 3-day leadership workshop where we're working on lots of different things, we still start with mental fitness because we need to raise people's awareness of themselves, their bodies, their thoughts, their emotions, so that they can manage them. And particularly if we're working, we work with all different types of teams. Some are good. They just want to, supercharge and take it to the next level. Some are very dysfunctional and there's big problems. And then majority are probably in the middle. Some things are good and some things aren't so good. And we're going to work on those. But particularly those teams that aren't doing very well, it's really important for us to prime people with you own your emotions and we expect you to manage them. We also, everybody here must assume positive intent. Everybody must assume positive intent, because where we go wrong is, the perceptual illusions. When we assume that when that person coughed, they did it deliberately to interrupt me because they never really liked me and now I really don't like them, and then you spiral. And it happens so often. And actually, why have we got here? Because we're in our heads too much. Right now we're seeing a lot more of it because we're really at home in our heads, cabin fever, but we're afraid of the hard conversations. We're not just calling it, say what you see. So we're letting it get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it becomes self-fulfilling anyway. So we need people to be self-aware. We also need them to be brave, to have the right conversations at the right time with the right people.
So what would then be your advice if something like this happens? Like maybe the coughing is not the best example to call it out.
Yeah, so I wouldn't call it out in a group context necessarily. Well, it depends how skilled you are, really. It's not helpful if you're not skilled because you just get worse. But for example, what I would do as a facilitator, I'll see people making faces and I'll say, hey, I just noticed that you made a face. Is everything okay? Right? And I have no problem doing that. You look confused. Oh, I can tell that you disagree with this. I'd love to hear more. You seem a little bit resistant. Can you talk to me? I just, call it. I'm not going to sit there, because what can happen is you just get in your head and like, oh, they don't like this. Maybe I'll speed up, or maybe I'll, try and push it harder, and I'll just ignore it and move on. Just call it, say it, have the right conversation. If people yawn, someone yawns. If you go into a session, let's say you're delivering a talk or piece of training, whatever, and you don't think you're very good, or you're nervous, or you're really worried about it, someone yawns, that can send you off in a massive spiral because you overlay meaning onto that yawn. That's because they're bored. That's because this is boring. It's because I'm boring. I'm not any good at this. Why did I say I was going to do this? I should never do this. Then you start speeding up. You start not making eye contact. You're not asking people questions. You're not engaging. Now listening. Yeah. Then they all start to go, what's going on with her? And then now you're getting the body language feedback from multiple people, reinforcing the fact that you're not very good, which actually isn't true because you just decided what that yawn meant. In which case that yawn could have meant, I worked 13 hours yesterday. I have a small baby at home. I only got 2 hours sleep, but I want to be here so much because I know this is going to be so good that I've come anyway, which is a much more helpful thought. And this goes back to mental fitness, understanding your thinking and where is it being triggered from? Where have you made up meaning? Where is meaning helpful? And what should be your response to it? So,
yes. Thank you for walking us through. And I think the example with the yawn is just fantastic. And I can just imagine by training ourselves, I can perfectly see me seeing someone yawning and going, wow, yes, this person had 13 hours of work, has a small baby at home, but wanted to be here so badly that now they push through. So just to relabel it, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter.
No, because you're making it up anyway.
Exactly.
So make up the good meaning that's going to be helpful.
Yeah.
So something I would do in face-to-face is when I see someone yawn, I'll say, I've noticed some people yawning. I'm going to open the windows. Is the temperature right here? Maybe I'll reduce the aircon. So I'm doing a couple of different things at the same time. I'm calling it out so that they're self-aware that, oh, that's actually a bit rude to yawn in someone's face. I'm also finding a solution, which is not I am boring. It's related to the ambience of the environment.
There's not enough oxygen, which is a fair point.
Which can be the actual answer, you know. And I just make everybody accountable for, okay, let's not send the facilitator signals that you're tired, bored, or whatever else. And what I'll also do, notice some people yawning, so on your feet.
I love to do that as well.
Yeah.
A little bit of stretching changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
And what is your experience when you, especially in the video call, when you see faces, and I love it that you're calling it out and just ask for, okay, I see that you don't agree. I would be curious. What is and I think it's a fine line between doing it right and doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Air quotes, but how it can feel offensive, how you get someone disturbed.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the scene that you need to set before that in order to be able to call someone out? And what is the reaction usually?
So I do scene setting when I moderate. Do I do scene setting when I facilitate? I'm trying to think. So, for example, in a moderation context, I would begin by saying, look, here's the objectives. This is why we're all here. Here's your role. Here's my role. And I'll explain my role, which is I need to hear equal kind of voice from each of you. So if you're being quiet, I'm going to use your name and I'm going to ask you to contribute. Fair warning. I'm not picking on you, but this is my job. Secondly, if you're talking way too much, I'm going to say, that's fantastic. Let's hear from someone else. I don't want you to take it personally. As I've explained, my role here is to hear from everyone else. I also use body language, which is easier in a face-to-face situation where you just turn to the people that haven't spoken and you put your back to the people that are speaking too much, and vice versa. I've also put my hand up, but not in a rude way. It's like, come to you in 1 sec and then move over there. Right. In a virtual setting, it's a bit more difficult, but it's still possible. And I think as long as it's coming from positive intent, then it's fine. If you feel yourself triggered and pissed off with someone, and then you're going, well, I can see that you disagree. You're asking for a fight. But if you do it from a place of inquiry, I get the sense, so you can say that, I get the sense that gives them a chance to go, no, I actually completely agree. I can feel resistance in the room. So then you're not pointing at one particular person. Or, Jim, you look a little bit confused. Do you want me to explain it again? Or do you have a question? No one gets annoyed about that. They're like, actually, they go, oh, wow, she's really paying attention and she cares about how I feel. So I think your tone is important. Mm-hmm. And to make sure that it's not accusatory and it is coming from a good place where you just want to. And you can also say, sometimes consensus isn't important, but so you can say, look, I want us all to get to a good place here, or it's important to me that I understand that you say what you're not saying, because I don't want to find out a week later that you all disagree. Yeah, but I've always got good responses. It can be, yeah, I do disagree. And let me tell you why. But if you don't do that, you know what happens? If you don't do that, they'll sit there, folded arms. They'll build more and more and more and more evidence. And then at some point, they'll just say, I disagree. And that is far more disruptive than it is to actually invite the disagreement.
Yeah. And I picked up two things that you just said that I just want to highlight again. One is the inviting someone to speak makes them also feel seen. Mm-hmm. So, as you said, you're paying attention to everyone's face. So if you invite someone to express themselves because you notice that they look as if they would disagree, if you do this in a curious way, then I think just emotionally it will feel comforting for them because they feel seen, and usually we like to be seen.
Yes.
And I was also thinking of a recent workshop I was in where we were mirroring each other. So one exercise was just mirroring. And in the debriefing of this exercise, we realized that, again, it's actually nice to, at first, it's a little bit surprising when we see that someone is picking up exactly the same gesture or facial expression that we have. But then it kind of feels comforting because we feel seen. So I was thinking that just mirroring someone who's making kind of a frowning face or disagreeing face might already solve the problem, because it also brings some lightness and humor in.
Yes. So I do that a little bit. Like, it's like, I can see you seem, and I'll do that. Sometimes I don't even get the word out, and they're like, yeah, but again, you do have to be careful to not insult them. Or to not feel like you're mocking them. Sometimes you don't even have to get them to, you can see the body language, and then you can call it out and go, oh, actually, let's now turn this on its head. What's wrong with this, or what's maybe not working right now? And because you've already seen that there's someone that's dying to say something negative about it that may not be working.
Yeah. In your experience, what makes workshops fail?
I don't know. Do workshops fail? I don't think workshops fail. I certainly don't, especially because, you might have a day, you might have 2 days. If you're with good facilitators, they're always iterating and changing and preparing. And, so I've not been in a workshop or run a workshop that I would ever say has failed. Has there been ones that could have gone better? Yeah. Are there ones that maybe you would have done a bit more of this and a bit less of that? Yes. But that's all in the learning, really. And I think as long as you recognize that your plan is just a plan, and if you become rigid and you stick to that, that's where you're going to go wrong. You need to listen to the room. You need to always think about your destination. There's multiple ways of getting there. Be fluid and be prepared to pivot. Then you'll be absolutely fine. But yeah, so I think a workshop would fail if, I don't know, a bunny rabbit was running it. What do people say to that usually?
All different kinds of things. I get the answer a lot that workshops don't fail, but mostly it's a lack of preparation or over preparation, and then sticking to the script too much and not listening to the room, as you just mentioned, being too much about ourselves as facilitators, making it about us and not about the group, not listening, these kind of things. And maybe to close off, because I know that you have a sharp ending. Sometimes as facilitators, and you mentioned it before, that our energy impacts the room. So if we're in our head, then the group will pick it up and mirror it and project it. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, and we all have these days where it's just, we are not at our best. We're not mentally fit, as hard as we try. What would be your advice to deal with our own shortcomings in terms of mental fitness when we're actually responsible for the group to thrive?
So I'm just thinking about myself, and I actually have a switch, mental switch that I switch, which is my performance switch. So no matter what it is that I'm doing, or, last year my father was dying of cancer and I'm still showing up and running workshops, but I find it fairly easy to leave my stuff at the door and get into performance mode. And I actually enjoy getting into the zone. For those who don't, I would say you need to change state. So whether that's playing music, whether it's jumping up and down on the spot, whether it's calling someone that can help you put you in the right frame of mind, or doing a ritual that, putting things in a bag and then leaving the bag outside of the door to mentally and emotionally get yourself in the right mental state. But you can't bring your stuff into a workshop, or it's pointless, because it's not about you and it's not about your stuff. So I think to work out, it's going to be different for everyone, but to work out what works for you and then start to practice that as a thing that you do just before you go on stage, as it were, in air quotes.
Yeah, and it also reminds me, the silent scream also came to my mind. And then Amy Cuddy's dominant posing. I think this could also work. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I like the bag. Put your stuff in a bag and leave it out the door.
Literally. Put your phone, put all of your stuff.
Nice. If someone in the audience, for a reason or another, fell asleep after minute 1, just woke up and doesn't have time to listen to the entire conversation again, what would you like them to take away still?
I think it's just about what becomes possible when we move beyond the mental illness and wellness phase of the spectrum and move into the mental fitness phase of the spectrum. How enhancing and strengthening your inner game, understanding your thinking, your emotions, and how they impact your decisions and your actions in life can be a game changer if you're just willing to understand yourself a bit more.
Thank you so much, Jodie, to share your expertise and experience with us. And I will put all your contacts and links to the show notes. So if someone is interested in hearing more, they can reach out directly.
Fantastic. Oh, one last thing I forgot to mention about mental fitness. We have a mental fitness scorecard, so you can find out your mental fitness. I'll send you the link as well. You can include it in the show notes for anyone who might be interested.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me, Miriam. I've really enjoyed it. We should do another one.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Still so much more to explore.
Yeah, there's so much.
Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.